Here we go. All the conversation right now surrounding, is there going to be a housing crash? All right, I'm going to give you a definition of when a housing crash happens. All right. A housing crash usually results in some sort of oversupply of housing within the market. In 2008, because of all the people who lost their homes because of the bad mortgages, right? We saw 4 million homes pop into the system nationally. I would say that as of the end of, February, we were still looking at only about 1.1 million houses on the MLS today. That feels like a lot less houses to me. And that, I'm like, does that result in a crash? Let's have a conversation about that. It's Nancy from Nancy Chu Homes. I'm a realtor here in Northern New Jersey. And in my 20 years in the business, I've sold over $500 million of real estate. Okay. Transaction volume is the big culprit here. This is the thing that everybody keeps talking about. Well, transaction volume isn't the full picture. That doesn't necessarily point, just because we have low transaction volume doesn't mean that it points towards a crash. I'll be the first to tell you that when I was in this business at the beginning, we were looking at, over 6 million units a year. The projection so far as of January, given the weather and, all the things that are happening, it's been really pointing more towards like 3.9 million units for 2026. So I'm guessing it'll be between that and 4.1, 4.2 units for the year. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot less than it used to be, but that doesn't necessarily indicate a crash in housing values. Between 2012 and 2022, we made 16 million new households. That's new household formations, right? Somebody, graduates, gets married, they form a new household. We only built about 8 million new housing units during that same time period. So that is half of what we need to house the people that currently could be in the market of looking for a property. So given that across the country, we're still looking at an average of about 3 months of inventory. That's relatively balanced in some, by definition of some markets. And in some ways, that's still very much a seller's market for a lot of the country. If they have less than 3 months of inventory like we do, then yeah. And for those that have more than, for more than 3 months, then yes, their sellers are definitely taking a little bit longer to sell. The day on market's going to be longer, and they have definitely less leverage in terms of what they accept, right? But the truth is, if you look at 2008, those people had to sell. We would call them forced sellers. They were financially in a position where they had to sell. Maybe they lost their job and they really couldn't afford the mortgage anymore. So they were forced. So if you talk about 4 million units hitting the market and they all kind of have to sell, yeah, we're going to see price drops, right? We're going to see price drops in the market. But it's very interesting because honestly, for instance, if you look at my Northern New Jersey market, I have far less of that happening. I see less in terms of short sale right now. I see less in terms of foreclosure because for a lot of our folks, they have a lot of equity in their homes. So they're not forced to sell. They'll simply choose to delist the home if they are not going to get the number that they want, by the way. I understand in 2008, a lot of folks did not have the opportunity to delist. They were forced to do it. But we haven't had a lot of delisting data, which I'm sort of surprised. Like NAR hasn't really, they haven't really tracked delisting data because it really hasn't been important up until now. So they started tracking that in 2022. So we have some data from 2022 to 2025. In 2022, 6 out of every 100 people would delisted their homes. By the time 23 rolled around, we're looking at about 10 people out of 100. 2024, 12 people out of 100. And now in 2025, last year, I would tell you, given the buyer demand slowdown, we were talking about 20 to 27 out of 100 sellers just choosing to delist their homes because they aren't forced to sell. They don't have to take the lower price number. They may have enough equity in the home, or they're choosing to maintain that home. Either it's the home that they live in or an investment property. They're simply saying, if I'm not going to get the number I want, then I'm just not going to sell it. So as of right now, you're seeing a full 1/5 of them choosing simply to take the house off the market instead of selling it for a lower number. And that's why we haven't yet seen a housing crash in value per se. And the truth is, the delistings right now are absolutely outpacing price cuts in a lot of different markets. All right. Yeah, do I see price cuts a lot in the Sun Belt area? That makes sense because of their pandemic era boom, right? But then like you see other metros, they're not they're not doing price reductions. They're simply doing delisting. Now, of course, new construction, you're always going to see price cuts in new construction, because for those folks who are developers, they have to sell those properties. So they may have, artificially, sort of high prices to begin with the expectation that they're going to slowly do the reduction in order to attract buyers at every stage, right? So in new construction, I don't really care that much about, price reductions in new construction. I think the builders are still making money with that, and they're just going to make a little bit less. Their margins are going to be a little bit less. It is what it is. All right. So I just want you guys to be very careful as we're moving into this sort of, crazy spring. We're going to hear a lot of conversation about, house prices crashing because, the transaction volume is low. But the truth is, a lot of different markets, people are choosing delisting because they're not forced to take a lower number. So that is how a lot of these house prices are going to stay close to where they are right now. All right, guys, just thought I'd share that with you, and I will talk to you guys. Oh, by the way, please, if you like what we have to say, like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff so we can help others. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you guys next week.